Hi, everyone. Firstly, a big thank you to Michael, Michelle, and the whole team for organizing this for us. I know a lot of work goes into it, and we're all very happy to be here. Also, a big thank you to all my panelists here. I think I must be the only moderator that has four girls in his panel, so I'm very happy. I know I don't have to speak, I don't have to say anything. They'll do all that. We have a lot of topics here, so rather than go over all of them with everyone, I'll just ask them specific questions so that we can cover as much as we possibly can. So I'll start with Bijal. Estate planning. I love estate planning, succession planning. How is it changing? How is it evolving? How has it evolved over the last 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? How do you think things are moving along?
Thank you, Pranav, and good evening to all of you. So I would definitely say that there has been a change in the entire estate planning scenario in India, and it's really moved more from pure wealth succession to really leadership as well as management succession of businesses when we're looking at it from a family business perspective. And to that extent, we've seen the growth curve in India on the wealth numbers in itself. And that is testimony to the fact that India has really emerged as a wealth jurisdiction. And to that extent, a lot of families are, at the realm of really having the leadership as well as the management structures really put in place. Another very important point, as I would see it, is that families are really somewhere struggling, especially on the business side, from the perspective of both cultural as well as a value integration. And to that extent, when you're looking at businesses, being in their second and third generation, just culturally as well as the vision on what you really call wealth has really changed from the first generation to the third and the fourth. On the personal side, what we've really seen is that individuals are really looking at global strategies of wealth. The pandemic has been a testimony of the fact of the wealth creation in India. And to that extent, a lot of Indian families have realized that them being that inward looking in their wealth creation in India has somewhere kept them on the back foot with respect to taking positions on the international market. So that is what we've really seen as a change. And of course, the change in just residency as well as citizenship planning is something which has really emerged for an Indian resident individual, especially on the high net worth side.
Fantastic. Sneha, now in terms of estate planning and succession planning, I know you deal with a lot of private clients. Is there a change in their expectations of what they want to do and how they want to go about it? And if so, what are those trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Pranav, for the question. These days clients are looking at not just, merely giving them a plan. I think it goes a long road in terms of not just looking at the wealth generator of the family. It's also about getting all the stakeholders involved and actually ensuring that the entire family is on board in order to ensure the success of the plan. It goes beyond just, the typical technical or the legal stuff that you typically get into, the documentation and all, because I think the real test of any plan is, its success at the execution stage. Earlier on, a lot of them, the patriarchs used to make their plans in isolation, and they had severe apprehensions on, sharing it with a larger audience in the family. But now they are cognizant of the fact that if the next gen are going to be the inheritors, they better be equipped with it as well. It's not just about passing on wealth, but also ensuring the individuals who are going to inherit that wealth are also equally involved in the entire process of putting the plan together, because at the end of the day, it's one thing for an individual to put a plan together, and you're expecting a different set of individuals who are going to come into their roles at a later date to actually execute it. So the expectation is a far more holistic approach, in terms of ensuring the inclusiveness of all these stakeholders involved. As well as, Bijal also rightly mentioned, these days you're talking with families who are truly global. So it's not just about giving them localized advice, it's also ensuring you have the global elements also put together to understand how cross-border laws, inheritance taxes are going to have a bigger role to play, and not just have a myopic view of the assets in a particular jurisdiction. So the entire thing definitely needs to be woven together. And of course, in terms of educating, the stakeholders also goes a big way.
Okay, Shweta, the ultra high net worth individual in India is amongst the most difficult being that one can come across. So, what challenges are you facing from them in terms of their expectations out of you? Has that changed in the last few years?
Thanks, Pranav. Good evening, everyone. So, Pranav, I think the challenges that we face, of course, first I would like to talk about the challenges that the Indian families are facing, because those will, in effect, percolate into the challenges that we are facing. And, we have to understand three things before we talk about challenges. One is the stage at which the Indian businesses are today. Second, the culture of the Indian families vis-a-vis the global counterparts like US or UK. And third, the changing circumstances. So first, when we talk about the stage at which the Indian businesses are, if you see the last 5-10 years and going forward is the stage of transition. Businesses are now transitioning from one generation to another. I'm talking about high net worth, ultra high net worth businesses. Because most of the wealth in India we would say was accumulated after liberalization. Indians started making a lot of money, business families. So this is the stage of transition. So that's a challenge that's maybe first of its kind that Indian families are witnessing. Second is the culture. So as compared to, say, a developed country, India is still hierarchy-based social structure. Of course, in parts, merit is also being recognized, but I'm talking about India in general, not only the metros. We still see that the families believe in the social setup. It's an honor culture as compared to, a merit-based, really. Also, we see a lot of joint families as compared to other countries. A lot of joint families, so a lot of uncles and nephews and grandparents and everyone working in the family. So all of this together makes India as a very unique destination where we cannot compare the plan for, we cannot compare the succession plan of this country with any other country or any other businesses of any other country. Third is the changing circumstance. So basically, as Bijal and Sneha said, that India is truly becoming global now. I think every family would have one member who is out of India. At least they have assets abroad. And what we hear from most of our clients now is that they want to diversify. Even if they don't have a member outside India, they want exposure outside India. And that's why the gift city is also picking up. So with all of these changing circumstances, I think the challenge for us as advisors is to not just rely on plain and simple advice like, okay, make a will, make a trust, but it's probably weaving in every part, especially the cross-border rules, regulations, managing the commercial aspects of business, and managing the emotions of the family, because we're talking about family businesses, which truly is a combination of, and it's actually kind of, there are two different goals in a way. One is business, which is very materialistic, and one are managing emotions of people, emotions of different family members. So I think that's the challenge, and for us as advisors, we need to now understand I think the first and foremost thing is to understand the culture of every family before giving them a plan.
Sunita, you bring a completely different perspective to this. You're an insider looking in from the outside.
An older one.
No, you can't say that. Clients coming and setting up structures out of Dubai or interested in Dubai, you must meet a lot of NRIs and resident Indians. How have things changed in the last 18 months, 24 months for you vis-a-vis these ultra high net worth individuals, HNIs, getting advice from you?
Pranav, it's an interesting question, and I think firstly, I'd just like to point out that we were we were together on a panel, most of us, I think,
Last
about
year.
a year ago when ODI regs had just come out. And up till then, and this is an observation, the wealth management industry in India, which is a very young management industry compared to many other established IFCs and jurisdictions, the level of knowledge and the depth and the effort that advisors would make into understanding the nuances, the antecedents, and the principles of good wealth management was still fairly superficial. And fast forward now, in fact, fast forward to this afternoon, listening to Sneha, listening to Bijal and Shweta. I just want to say that Sneha and Shweta give me much hope. I'm, as I said, a bit of a veteran in the industry, and I say that in a very proud way, because listening to the two of you today gives me a lot of hope. You understand what families need, and the approach that you ladies have just demonstrated for the entire audience, and for those of you who are fairly new to the industry, I would really ask you to stop and just clock what the ladies have just been talking about. Because yes, it is an inclusive process. It's an emotive process. It's a diversified process. But most of all, it's a process that continues to evolve. So your relationships with your families who are entrusting you with their wealth is a very, it's a very special relationship. It's a very sacred relationship. It's a huge privilege and a responsibility. So first and foremost, the two of you, from somebody who's outside of the industry, seeing the conversation change just in the space of 12 months, thank you very much. Going back to what you were talking about, or what do I see sitting in Dubai? Well, obviously, the obvious factors are Singapore has now introduced substance. Singapore, in terms of putting up hurdles in order to ensure that anyone who uses Singapore as a jurisdiction to establish a family office is really going to be there for the right reasons, and they're not using Singapore as a conduit or a cheap, quick fix, almost in a commodity sense of the word. Let's just put up a family office and get some residency and off we go. And I think that's where, again, the audience today, it's really important that you start the conversation properly with families, understanding what do they want to do, and then guide them in terms of how they can achieve that, but in the proper way. So in Dubai, we've got, earlier on this year, I helped the DIFC government, for example, the regulator. We revised the 2015 family office regulations. And the laws really, we hadn't had the time to really sit back and revise them. But yes, as Bijal was mentioning, COVID had a big impact and families are becoming more mobile. There's a lot more movement of wealth and diversification. And so what we did is we benchmarked against many other IFCs and put in a more realistic, user-friendly, but still substantive, credible set of regulations. And so today, if you want to set up, being completely compliant using the ODI regulations, for example, you want to set up a family office in the UAE, then although technically there are 5 options, from the UAE's perspective, it's only one real option that will meet the criteria. And the key there, again, for those of you that are advisors, is to ensure, as the ladies were saying, get the right advisors on both sides of the conversations to make sure that the roadmap is blessed, that it works for purpose here, and not only now, but in the future. So we're seeing significant wealth coming out of the country. Again, a word of caution there. You would have seen, of course, the likes of some significant global family office players. Bridgewater, for example, Ray Dalio's vehicle, set up in ADGM. We still have this herd mentality. If you think back to one of the family office forums that happened at the Imperial in Delhi about 8 years ago, and in those days everyone was talking about a family office, and I overheard kind of second and third gen saying, well, he's got one, so I want one too. Bless them, they didn't even know what the function was and should and could be, etc. So conversations are changing significantly, and now in AGM, just because Bridgewater may have set up there, it's not going to be the right jurisdiction for everybody. And the reasons for setting up there were deeply personal to that entity as such, and I know this on a first-hand basis. But if you look very carefully, and the devil will be in the detail, the ADGM does not have a family office set of regulations, ladies and gentlemen. It has a restricted scope company that could be utilized as a family office. But guess what? Again, as a family office in the old European sense of the word, in terms of an investment advisor, an asset manager, it's not the entity that holds the corpus of the wealth. So these are some fundamental points that I think if we continue to have the conversation, whenever I come to India, I try and spend time going around teaching the teams here, sharing knowledge.
Thank you. I mean, in fact,
That's what we need to do.
It leads very well to my actually next question, which is, Bijal, every rich Indian that wants to set up a structure overseas normally comes to you for advice. So are they being able to move their money overseas? We had a lot of euphoria last year, August 22nd, about the rules being changed, ODI rules. People wanted to put money through NBFCs, ODIs, setting up family offices overseas. What do you see now over the last 4 or 5 months when the rules seem to have changed a bit?
Okay. So I guess, very difficult question. And of course, it's been a topic of discussion for advisors and families over the last year or so, ever since in the month of August that the regulations were really announced. Of course, we've seen a number of families really wanting to move capital outside of India. And, to that extent, what they've realized is that the LRS, limit of $250,000 per person for a family is not really sufficient for the level of capital which they really have in India. What we've really seen, and the change in the regulations as of last year, was essentially allowing Indian operating companies to really set up subsidiaries outside of India to invest in financial services business. And as any regulation would have it, what a financial services business is has not been defined. And of course, there was a floodgate reaction of having families wanting to really set up their family offices. And it seemed like that was the rationale of really having this particular change. To that extent, what we have seen is, yes, you've seen families move money under the LRS regime. You've also seen situations where the Reserve Bank of India approval has been taken, wherein companies engaged in financial services business in India have set up overseas subsidiaries. That's not a new regulation, that's always been there. But of course, the important point to really note here is that these are not situations where individual capital has really moved. And to that extent, it yet does get stuck within the Indian, exchange control regulations, wherein if at all that money has to be enjoyed by the individual family member, it does need to be rolled back into India, which is the parent, and then essentially distributed to the resident individuals. The next, what we have really seen is a lot of relocation strategies. And families have realized that, there is, perhaps some particular structuring which needs to be undertaken if at all they're looking at their Indian companies, whether operating or in the financial services business, really set up subsidiaries outside of India. Not to say that it cannot be done. We have seen it, over the years where you are able to really set it up. But what we have seen is situations where they do not want the capital really stuck into a corporate structure in India. We are seeing, prior to a monetization event for a particular family, which is going to be the creation of the family office for them, they're really relocating themselves outside of India, such that whenever they are actually, while they are non-residents, they are able to monetize their Indian business and take out substantial amount of capital. Of course, there are limitations of how much can be taken out by by non-resident individuals who have invested into Indian companies as residents, but it's in any event better than the $250,000. The other regime which we have really seen, become a big topic of conversation is the entire GIFT City. And you have the GIFT City, the IFSC, really announce the family investment fund regulations. And interesting to see as to how the GIFT City was really the the solution which India really wanted to give to Indian families of rather setting up family offices, say in Singapore as well as in Dubai, and really look at having those family offices set up in India itself. So you do have a number of applications already made before the authorities. However, none of them have yet gotten approval. And it's not because of the regulators not really want to give an approval. It's just that they've realized and recognized that there is so much of an interest. They just want to be extremely sure as to what they're really getting into. And we should be seeing an approval coming in very soon. I mean, it's been a long wait of almost 6 to 7 months, but it is really at their final stages. So once that approval really comes in, we would see a lot of money really being invested through the family investment fund structure. The government is very clear that this is meant for making investments outside of India and not really meant for you to actually have a flight of capital outside India. So to that extent, yes, the money will essentially finally be booked into the family investment fund, sitting in GIFT. And to the extent that families have been, very optimistic of wanting to have, capital go outside of India, given the fact that the family investment funds are taking long to set up and the approvals are taking really long, we are seeing families really looking at setting up alternate investment fund structures in the GIFT City for investments outside of India. So you have seen a number of them already set up, perhaps not really having invested in because they are very new yet, but that's something which we will see, on the cards now.
Well, since we're on the topic of the regulator, I'll tell you all, since it's quite late in the evening, a funny story. It'll just take a minute. I was talking to a client of mine, and while describing the Indian regulator, he was telling me, he told me a story that Hugh Laurie, the comedian, always talks about. He was in Botswana acting in a movie, and one of the movie's scenes had him walking with a lion. And Hugh Laurie asked one of the trainers, he said, look, I have to walk with this lion tomorrow. How can you make sure that he doesn't attack me? He said, no, they're very well fed. They looked after, they're not going to bite you, they're not going to go for you. He said, well, in the case that he does attack me, what am I supposed to do? He said, well, when he's charging at you, just take some shit from the ground, throw it in his face. He'll get disoriented and you run off. And he said, well, what if there's no shit in the ground? He said, trust me, when that lion is charging at you, you'll find shit in the ground. And I think my client said, that regulator is the lion, and I don't want him charging at me. So anyway, Sneha, are families adequately prepared to transition to the next generation?
So thanks to the pandemic, I would say families have at least taken cognizance of the fact that they need to do something about it. So I think that was a peak time when actually, a lot of families reached out and said they need to put something in place, understanding the fragility of life. However, from a preparedness perspective, I would say that they are getting there, but not at the pace that they should. Ironically, wealth creation always takes precedence over, actually getting into the preservation, protection, and the transmission plan to it. Clients typically, tend to procrastinate when it comes to actually putting their plan together, and that also in a timely manner. So definitely, I think there's a long way to go. Also, in terms of, the preparedness is, I think it's also a shift of the mentality that needs to take place. It's no longer, as I said earlier as well, it's not about just putting a document or a plan in place. There is much more to it, which families need to be aware and prepared for. I think also the fact that, when you talk about an estate plan to a client, there's this immediate apprehension about conflict and dispute that discourages them to even have a very transparent and open conversation, failing to realize that constructive conflict is actually quite healthy. Vis-a-vis having no communication or no conversation with the stakeholders, which will actually lead to destructive conflict that can actually, completely erode away the wealth of the family. So from a preparedness perspective, I think they have a long journey to cover, while the While there are certain set of families who are right up there, who have all the tick marks, they do understand the importance of having a timely plan. But I think there are a lot of families who need to come up the curve.
Shweta, now in terms of the ultra HNI families, what risks do you think they face right now, and what are the solutions that they're looking at currently? Purely from the succession.
In terms of succession, yeah. I think in terms of succession, the most important thing, which I discussed earlier also, the most important thing is how do you create a seamless transition of wealth from one generation to another. See, no solution is going to be perfect, and clients need to understand that. We say that, of course, if you need to have a basic will in place, but will can have disputes. We say that, a trust is a better solution. Of course, it is a better solution, but can you say it's 100% perfect? I don't think so. There are disputes, even when trusts have been created, and we have seen that in India and abroad. So I think what risk the clients face is that first of all, I think they need to understand that without any plan in place, it's going to be a chaos, okay? And that's why they need to have something in place. So transition of wealth, I think, is the first and foremost important thing that, they would expect to be taken care of, especially with the changing facts, like I mentioned again, people are going global, assets are diversified. So with all of these in place, I think they need to protect their legacy. So when we meet, just to give you an example, one of our clients is a listed company, 5 brothers. The first generation is 5 brothers, all above 65, all the brothers. The second and even the third generation is now entering into business, and they have no plan in place. But the good thing is that they realize, and maybe that's credit to advisors like all of us, because I think the awareness, clients are more and more aware now. So they are aware that they need to create something, but they don't have anything in place. So I think that's a risk, that not having anything is a risk, and they have to live with the risk of any structure not being 100% perfect.
Thank you. Sunita, I'll give you the last word. If you had to advise an Indian ultra HNI, what advice would you give them, 60 seconds, if they wanted to set up an offshore structure?
First and foremost, consult with your local advisors and consult with your family and have some clarity. And if you don't, then at least start to understand the objectives that all the family members across the family need to achieve. And once you've done the internal housekeeping piece and really understood, provided it's been an inclusive process, that's when the international advisors should come into play and not respectfully choose jurisdictions because they've been marketed to the advisors very heavily, but go outside of your comfort zone and identify advisors who can give you a comparative analysis of which jurisdiction is going to be the best, both for now, at least in the next 15 years, bearing in mind where the family are located, what the diversification plans are, what the asset classes are, where are they stagnant, where are they operational, income generating, potentially toxic. So there's a very big picture to be taken into account, and at the same time to also enshrine some basic family governance. And I think, in a nutshell, that should be the process and the methodology.
All right. Thank you all for the fantastic half an hour. Thanks again, Michael, for organizing this. Cheers.